Welcome to the Health Daily Show. I'm your host, Chitra Nabat. Joining us today is Kristina Saffran, CEO of Equip. Kristina, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Kristina, what is Equip? How does it work?
Equip is the leading provider of virtual evidence-based eating disorder treatment in the United States. We partner with insurance companies to cover a year or more of treatment and match families with a fully virtual 5-person care team. All families get a therapist, a dietitian, an MD, both a physician and a psychiatrist, and then what I believe to be the secret sauce, a peer mentor, somebody who's been in a strong and active recovery, and a family mentor, someone who's helped their loved one through the recovery process. All employees reflective of the diversity of the population that we serve, trained in the evidence-based treatment for eating disorders and for the comorbidities, and really deliver the right amount of support in the moment when folks need it, and then encourage people to go out and build a life worth living.
Take us into the next level, because you talked about some of the elements there. How does it actually work in terms of the workflow of what the patient consumer experiences and some of the outcomes delivered?
Yeah. So one question that we often get is, what level of care are you? There's been kind of an antiquated staircase model of care for both eating disorders and substance use disorder, where people think when you have an eating disorder, you have to start at this facility level of care, step down to a partial hospitalization, step down to an intensive outpatient program, step down to outpatient. Really hard to find that treatment, often not covered by insurance. Folks are switching treatment teams, switching modalities, and it leads to this really gross 50% relapse rate in the first year. So we replace all of those levels of care except for medical and psychiatric inpatient. Partner really closely with those levels of care. So folks can join us. About a third are joining us directly from a medical inpatient. Many have been in and out of residential treatment centers. Some, it's their first outpatient journey. We're really able to meet families wherever they are on their eating disorder journey. They come in, we set up a really individualized care plan for them based on their goals, their comorbidity, their unique family structure. And then we start the treatment process. We know that in order to get somebody better for an eating disorder, the first thing that you need to do is focus on nutritional rehabilitation, which often means weight restoration for a lot of people. And so that is the main focus for the first several weeks to months of treatment, depending on where somebody comes in. And we know that you need support for that. Eating disorders are brain disorders that require you to fight your brain upwards of 6 times a day. It's not only ineffective, but frankly, kind of mean to treat it as an individual illness. You really need people around you to help you structure the home for pro health. So that's the focus for the first part of treatment. And then as folks get to that place of nutritional rehabilitation, we really start working on the comorbidities. This disorder never occurs in isolation. Anxiety is about 60% of folks have an anxiety disorder, 50% have major depression, 30% have OCD, 30% of PTSD. And in order to get someone really better, you need to work on that as well. And so the focus shifts in the latter part of treatment once folks are nutritionally rehabilitated to working on those comorbidities as well and getting people back to building a life worth living and full recovery.
You talk about a personalized care plan. Where do metrics come in? Because you're capturing a lot of data. So how do you set key metrics that you're monitoring for each person? And then what's that process in terms of if they relapse, that integration process with their loved ones, tracking that data, the analytics?
Metrics are incredibly important. The mental health field in general, and specifically the eating disorder field, has really suffered from a lack of data transparency, both to payers, to families, and to providers. And so we're tracking a whole lot of data on a many times a week, weekly, monthly basis. So we look at a couple of core measures, the first being eating disorder symptoms and behaviors via validated scales. We also look at comorbidity symptoms, so anxiety, depression. For eating disorders, right now, 80% of our patients are on weight gain. So certainly looking at weight gain, rate of weight gain, as we know that that is really, really critical to a full recovery. And then finally, looking at parental self-efficacy and caregiver burden. Those have actually been shown to be the strongest predictors of quick and lasting recovery. I said finally, but really finally, quality of life improvement, because at the end of the day, that's really what we care about. We're really proud that in the first 8 weeks of treatment, we're already seeing significant improvements, with 2/3 of our patients reporting significant improvements in eating disorder symptoms and behaviors, and depression and anxiety, and 80% of our caregivers reporting a significant decrease in caregiver burden and a significant increase in their confidence in their ability to take care of their kids at home, which is pretty amazing, especially given that I always talk about this treatment. It gets harder before it gets easier. It is really, really challenging in the first 8 weeks of treatment. So really amazed that we're already seeing those incredible results.
You've got competitors using traditional ways to treat eating disorders and other health tech companies. Given your own battle with eating disorders and overcoming it, how did you assemble these ingredients, this methodology to differentiate and stand out?
Yeah, absolutely. So we knew that it was going to be virtual pre-pandemic. And really, we have found that virtual is the right way to treat eating disorders. And that's for two main reasons. You'll hear me talk a lot about this idea that you cannot build a life worth living if you're not living life. I, unfortunately, have had so many peers that I was in treatment with now over 17 years ago who are still cycling in and out of facility-based care. At this point, haven't finished high school, college, held a job, held a relationship. Recovery becomes so much harder to get into when you haven't built up that life worth living. The other thing that we know is that this treatment is hard. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. And it works best when you're able to bring your village into care. When I was going through it, my parents both worked. They'd have to commute home, figure out childcare for my younger brother. They often couldn't come. Now we have dads calling in from construction sites, moms calling in from work, families bringing aunt and uncle and babysitter and nephew, and whoever else in the village is going to support that person, which we know leads to stronger outcomes and reduces caregiver burden. Also important to note that I talk a lot about family. We very much believe in a chosen family approach, whatever that means to you. The idea is that this is a really hard illness to fight alone. So that's critical. The other thing that we know is, unfortunately, in mental health writ large, a lot of our existing treatment modalities are not evidence-based, which is really horrifying. And so we know that there is a strong evidence base. As I mentioned, this is a brain disorder, hard to fight alone. You need people around you. And then also you really need to focus on nutritional rehabilitation as a first step. We know that you cannot therapize a malnourished brain. That is absolutely critical. I think the missing ingredient was this lived experience component. We talk a lot about the fact that treatment that feels good is really different than treatment that works. That is really true for a lot of mental health illnesses. Treatment is really, really hard. The thing, though, is that if it's too hard that people drop out and don't do it, it's a moot point. It won't matter. And so you really need to bring in that lived experience component to motivate people, to engage them. And I think that's where the peer and family mentors play this incredibly impactful role in keeping people engaged, keeping them motivated to keep going through the hard stuff.
You could have built a direct-to-consumer business or B2B2C. You did the latter and pursued payers as your gateway. Tough to do. Why this approach, and how did you navigate and get traction?
Oh, it was absolutely critical. So I, in my own recovery from anorexia, was very fortunate to get access to good treatment, quickly found out just how grossly inequitable this field is, with 80% of the 30 million Americans who struggle not getting treatment. And so at 15 in my recovery, started a nonprofit called Project Heal to break down systemic barriers to access. So access to care has always been incredibly important to me. I think as I grew up in this field with some of the leading clinicians and academics and researchers, and then also thousands and thousands of patients and families, it really brought me to understand the importance of quality care. It's not enough for people to have access to treatment that didn't work. But from the very beginning, that has been a non-negotiable. And so actually started forming relationships with payers because I saw in my journey over the last 15 years, more and more people having access to facility-based care and no quality outpatient care, which didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And so became friendly with the chief medical officer of Optum Behavioral Health and started talking to him 4 years ago about how this approach didn't make a whole lot of sense. And I knew the approach that needed to happen. And he essentially said to me, if you build it, I will come. And so I was off to the races 4 years ago. And I think certainly having Optum as, our first payer, United Healthcare, the largest insurer in the country, definitely greased the wheels for more to come along. And then unfortunately, we started right around the pandemic and the need just absolutely skyrocketed. And so right now we have access to about 115 million folks through their in-network benefits, which means that their insurance covers it, which is absolutely incredible, over a third of the country. And I won't stop until every single person has access to this and doesn't need to pay out of pocket.
So on that point of every person getting access to this, what are the steps to get that mass market buy-in and adoption at scale?
Yeah, it's continuing to educate the payers, right? I mean, that is what we need to do to make sure that they have this access. I think one of my favorite things is to educate the Medicaid payers. We know that eating disorders, as food insecurity rises, eating disorders directly rise. This is an illness that affects people equally across race, class, ethnicity. Up to a third of sufferers are men. The majority of folks with eating disorders are not underweight. There's so much misconception, and I really love to educate them on this is your population. This is a really big problem. So it's the coverage plus the awareness and the education. And this is where we really, really need storytelling. I think it's data plus stories of people who don't fit that stereotypical mold, which is the majority of people with eating disorders, talking about the fact that these don't have a look, that these are serious, that these are the second deadliest mental illnesses, and yet full recovery is absolutely possible. And so there's a lot of work to be done. We're actually working this year to launch the first ever pediatric screener for eating disorders. Kind of crazy that it doesn't exist, but suffice it to say that right now, if you fit the mold to a T, you are not getting diagnosed. I did. And as a 13-year-old, white, thin, upper middle class, cisgender girl with a history of anorexia, I went into my pediatrician having lost about 8 pounds, and he didn't even bat an eyelash. So if you fit the mold to a T, you're not getting diagnosed. Certainly anybody who doesn't, which is a large majority, is not. And we really need to change that and really educate folks.
Kristina, leadership. In career, business life, there are many rules, codes, norms on how things are done. Where have you been a code breaker, and how did you do it?
I think that I always say my greatest strength as a leader is I don't need to be the smartest person in the room. I'm really good at assembling, figuring out who those folks are, putting them together, getting them motivated to come together, sit and come into conversation with one another, and then really motivating them to work towards a common goal. And so I think that humility, one of our favorite cultural values at Equip, my personal favorite, is trust your village. And it really is a nod to this idea and to our treatment team. The idea being like, there's no hierarchy. The MD is not more important than the peer mentor. And it's not one person on the team getting the family better, but really the entire team working collaboratively, understanding how to leverage the strengths of their teammates, ask the stupid questions, and really work together to be able to be successful. I would say the other thing is authenticity. I've only ever known how to be myself. And I think that has served me incredibly well in my journey of really being honest about what I know, what I don't know, and surrounding myself with folks who I don't have all the skills in the world. And so just making sure that I surround myself with great folks who have skills that I do not have.
Kristina, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.